And hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our event today. I'm Megan Moody. I'm the Immersive Technologies Librarian for Studio X, the hub for extended reality at the University of Rochester. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our very first Voices of XR speaker event for this spring. And this series is made possible by Kathy McMorran Murray and the National Science Foundation as part of the Interdisciplinary Graduate Training in Science, Technology, and Applications of Augmented and Virtual Reality at the University of Rochester. I would like to thank Nathalie Mathe for joining us today. Nathalie is a pioneer VR creator and globally recognized consultant, educator, and public speaker. As a former NASA AI scientist and visual effects artist, she combines her artistic passion with a solid scientific and technical background to explore new frontiers in VR storytelling and embodiment. She is the founder of Native VR, an independent VR studio in California, where she focuses on creating immersive experiences with a transformative and social impact. Her original interactive film, U-Turn, is a comedy raising awareness on the gender gap in the tech industry and was nominated for Best Interactive Experience at the Rain Dance and Festival of International Virtual and Augmented Reality Stories Festivals. In this talk, she will describe her work creating VR projects with a transformative and social impact and how she experimented with teaching VR remotely during the pandemic. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end. And lastly, as I noted, this session is being recorded and it will be available later to you on the Studio X website. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nathalie.
Hello, good afternoon. I think for you it's afternoon. Thank you for inviting me, and I will share some of my work and what I did over the last 8 years. Let me start and share my screen. Yeah, so I'm going to present, how for me virtual reality can be used for building empathy, also as a new creative medium and for social impact, because those are the, and of course for teaching, because those are the categories that, I'm really focusing on. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, and she read my bio, but I started more in research and science, and was working at NASA as a computer scientist for about 8 years. Then I shifted and I went back to school to do more artistic endeavors, and I went to work in the animation and visual effects industry on animation movie and big films for another like 10 to 12 years. And then I discovered the beginning of the VR second wave in 2013, the first headsets, and decided that's really something that I wanted to get involved. Like this was the new frontier in storytelling and creativity. So, that's me like 25 years ago at NASA Ames. At the time working on the early machine learning and using user feedback to learn the user preferences and the up and down button that later on Facebook started to make much more popular. When I started in the animation industry, this was in France, and we were working a lot on animation TV series for kids, and some feature film animation movies too, like Dragons Hunters and Persepolis, which won an award at Cannes. And then I shifted to more, big movie blockbusters, visual effects. And visual effects is, highly technical, but also very artistic. So this was a way for me to combine like those different skills for students who are interested in in that kind of career, it's very rewarding because it's really combining like all kind of different skills. And it did prepare me well when I discovered virtual reality, because virtual reality is also a very technical field, but also a field where there is a space to be creative and to do storytelling in different ways. So why tell stories in VR? Why is it a different medium? And I know you've had like a bunch of talks already, so I'm not going to go into like basics and details. But basically, what virtual reality allows you to do is to give the viewer a sense of being there, like physically, emotionally, mentally, and socially, and not all of those at once, depending on the experiences. But definitely, it's highly applicable when you want to transport the viewers to places they don't have access to, whether it's remote, like there is a wonderful experience right now done by Felix and Paul, where on Oculus TV, where you can go and be in a spacewalk, in space. They did bring up a 360 camera out there. It's the first in history, and you can like really float and be there with them. When it's too dangerous, there are some situations where learning to operate and do surgery on a patient, it's better to do it with some simulation, and VR can really give you a first-person experience. Or sometimes it's too expensive. I just saw some training done by an airline, and they had to train like thousands of staff, and it's cheaper to reconstruct an airplane in VR than having a physical mock-up where they get trained, for example. Sense of scale is also important. Perspective taking and creating intimacy are kind of related, and that's part of creating empathy. It's been called an empathy machine, but putting you in the shoes of someone else, and I will talk more about that in the work that I've done later. Creating intimacy comes from the sense of being there and close to the person, in the same room, basically in the same physical space, and increasing engagement because of the interactivity, because of the sense of presence. Like people feel more engaged, and students also feel more engaged. So those are like the main domains where it's really relevant to use VR. And they are, when I say VR, it's basically like immersive medium, and there are like many different categories. I haven't included AR, which is a little bit different because it's more like augmenting the real world. But you have many different ways of use of, like, I say different categories of medium because it's almost like different mediums. But 360 video footage is basically more real world captured, but it's not really interactive. All you can do is look around. Then you have photogrammetry and volumetric video, which are the next step, which is basically also capturing the real world by scanning it and having a 3D model of the environment, but now also of the people in it, the actors, or whatever you want. So you can have the sensation that this person is really there, but you still cannot interact really with them because it's still something that has been recorded. Also, there is progress being done. And then, on the other side, so this is more coming from film, and then on the other side, coming from gaming and computer graphics and animation, you have the fully interactive kind of simulated digital environments and, CG actors, and it can be fully interactive. Because this is all like 3D models that you can interact with, or actors which can have some AI or some script attached to them to interact with them. And then there is the mixed location-based entertainment and VR live performances, or sometimes it's called VR theater or improvisation, where you can have a mix of real environment that have been captured or modeled, actors that are performing live and are seen as avatar in the space, multiple people, social dimension. So there is really this mix to consider. Like it's a very rich medium, and there are like tons of possibilities. So in this sense, when you want to design a VR experience, you have to ask yourself a list of questions about like or dimensions along which you want to design. Like how much immersion do I want? How much interaction? Existence. This is kind of a new one because you don't have that really in film or traditional media. Existence means who am I as the viewer or player or participant? Like we don't know how to call it anymore, or the student, the learner. Who am I in this experience? And is my existence acknowledged by others? Can I interact with them, or can I just watch them? Am I a fly on the wall, or am I a participant and a protagonist in the story? And that makes a huge difference. Then you want to think about how you are using time and space. Are you telling a linear story in time, or are you using space to tell a story? Like people can explore a space and pick up object or interact with some characters, and that's how the story is told, or the lesson is learned, or whatever. So those are different dimensions. The physical versus the digital, that's a little bit what I was discussing in the previous slide, which is how much of the space is the real physical space and how much is digital. And that's more for like location-based entertainment, maybe. And then the collective individual, before COVID, it was a lot of individual VR experiences, but with COVID, social VR exploded, and now you can meet as an avatar in those virtual spaces, and classrooms can meet together as avatars in those 3D world. So it's really adding also like a new dimension, and it's bringing a lot of issues as well, but a lot of really interesting possibilities. Regarding, when I started in the space, I started with 360 video because it was kind of an easy translation from the previous work I was doing on feature movies. So I worked on a bunch of different pieces, from like music concerts to kind of adventure, taking you to places where you couldn't go, to fiction, to some commercials. So I'm just going to show you a quick scroll through a video so you can see. This one was one of the early one when we went to film Paul McCartney in concert in San Francisco. This was 2014, and this was the first time he was being filmed with a 360 video camera, and you can see everything on stage. You can see everything that's happening, and this was filmed in full stereo, so and with all the pyrotechnics, sometimes it can be a little bit tough for the camera, but you can, the whole crowd is here. So we shot from 2 different locations, in front of the stage and behind the stage next to the piano. So you can really like feel more like like a viewer at the concert here, and when you are next to the piano, then you feel like much more intimate, and you have the view from the from Paul McCartney. So that's pretty cool, and it gives you really a sense of much more intimacy with the concert, with the music. Another example was like in the Himalayas. This is, beautiful to be able to go there. And not many people are able to go. And so this was with the North Face. We followed two climbers that were going there. And basically we taught, we kind of taught them how to use the camera, because you have to be really trained and, to be able to be at those altitudes. And so you kind of follow along the climb with them. And there are many of those experiences that exist nowadays. Another one, this was more commercial for a brand for clothing, and it was used in a little bit more creative ways, with like the place transforming and following the person there. Another one that was for a non-profit to fight girls' marriage, forced marriage, was more like a documentary testimony of a young girl who was forced to marry and had a child and was rejected by the family because it was a boy, not a boy, it was a girl, and like all the stigma of this situation and having to return to our family and our original family. So this is more like, again, taking you to witness, places and situations where you couldn't be there, and being like a first, having like a, very intimate view of being with them. And then this is some more. This one was about climbing at Yosemite, and this was climbing and base jumping. And what I wanted to tell you a little story about this one, because we really put the camera like in places that were like on the rocks, on the wall, like very, difficult places, so that you could really be, with the climber on the rock. And this was presented at South by Southwest. And I remember this person who came to sit on a wheelchair and watch it. And when he removes his headset, he was really moved. And, I asked him, how was it for him? And basically he told me like, he used to be an athlete and he got an accident and was paralyzed. And by watching this piece, he was telling me like he could feel muscles in his legs that he had not felt in years. So for me, this is not a scientific study, of course, but this was really moving to see how it can transport people, into really a different space. So let me go back to the talk. And I'm going to talk about the next piece, which is something I produced and directed in 2017. It's called U-Turn, and this was a short interactive 360 video to tell the story of a woman working in the tech industry and some of the discrimination that she's facing. And the way we did it is that we split the 360 video in two halves of 180 side and another 180 side in the back. And we use the sound and a very specific sound design to let you turn between the two stories. They are happening in parallel. You cannot stop them. So it's up to you to choose the point of view. But as you can see with the arms at the bottom, this is a full one person, first person, what we call first person. You have a body. When you look down, you are either a woman or you are a guy on the other side. So you can alternate between a female and male point of view. And depending on what side you watch and how much, you will understand more or less about what is going on. And the whole idea behind that was that people would watch it as a group and then discuss it and compare how much they had gotten. Like in real life, no one is able to capture all sides of a situation or a problem or a conflict when something happens. So it was trying to kind of reproduce this like multiple perspective. Everyone has a different take on the story, and based on how you choose to watch it. And this was, toured at many international festivals, but I also had the chance to work with a researcher at Stanford University who wanted to do a user study for the impact, and later on, this also became part of a case study in a book, Crafting Story for Virtual Reality. But what you can see on the right side is a graph of how people watch it. So, we took a bunch of, I think about 30 volunteers to watch it. And what we found out is, and that I had seen when I was showing it at festivals, was that everyone is watching it differently. There is not one. But, all in all, there are like 3 categories. There are the people who, as you can see, like in the middle, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but A15, this person is like turning all the time. This person is like a total, FOMO, fear of missing out, and they are trying to catch like everything that's happening. But that's not, how most of the people watch it. Most of the people turn like every minute or so, or 5 to 10 times. And the way also the system, the story was designed and the edit of the story was that when one scene was finishing, you could still turn around and watch, the end or more of the other scene. They were not fully synchronized. And the sound cues also, would give you some information, but it was really up to people to decide when to turn. We just gave them some cues and some, and then there are some people who like just watch one side almost. So that was really interesting. But what was more interesting was the full study, because this was a study that compared different conditions. So we did a 2D version of the film that they watched on TV, and then we did 180 version. So they didn't have to turn. They were watching each story one after another. And then the full 360 version with interactivity and choosing what side you want to watch. And what was really interesting was, while the 360 version did create, for some people more stress and and maybe less intimacy with the characters, because basically they watch only half of it, instead of the full 20 minutes, they got to watch 10 minutes and partial stories on each side. But this was the only condition in which it did improve their sense of personal responsibility to do something, to take action. So that was like really interesting to me, because the design had been totally intuitive, and it's not like we had the budget to test different designs. So, the whole experience was built this way. But this led to making a series of 9 episodes that was commissioned by a large corporation for their HR training, and we kind of repeated the same model but with different biases and discrimination, racial, ethnic, mental health biases, stigma, all kind of different. So from this point of view, that really shows like how much VR can be used to allow change in perspective, and putting you into the shoes of someone else to gain a new perspective. Before I move to the teaching side, the new direction that I've been exploring, because the previous were more like 360 videos, even of some of U-turn was more interactive, but it's more the specialized nature and how do you tell a story with a space and by allowing the viewer to move around. So it's more spatial and more interactive. How to use photogrammetry and volumetric videos so that you have still realistic environment and characters, because that's why we chose to do like U-turn as video, because we wanted to have the actors and the performance and the emotions. It's really hard to have that with CG, characters. So depending on the situation, if it's pure like technical training, then it's fine. But in this case, it was really an emotional, experience. So we wanted to have the actors. But with volumetric video, now you can bring the actors as 3D model inside the space. So it becomes like really interesting. And then the topics I'm focusing on are more, I've shifted toward, how to create more resilience and mental health and well-being. And that's linked to some of what I'm going to talk about, of what I did with my students, because of course during the pandemic, everything changed and there were like huge challenges with students' mental health and well-being. So that's a topic that I'm really interested in using VR to bring more tools and skills to the student in this domain. So when I was at Drexel University, I taught there for 2 years until recently, until the end of last year. After the first wave of the pandemic, I realized students were really suffering from social isolation. And since, I was teaching them how to create VR content, and we had some classes already doing 360 videos, but I realized, well, let's have them engage in world building. And I will, this is kind of a new thing that has been emerging lately. So the idea was to design in VR directly for VR. So instead of, creating in front of your computer, sitting with a desktop app to create, a 3D model or whatever, the idea was to use creative tools that already exist in VR, and to directly, create inside of VR, because it's really a new approach to, design thinking. It allows like a totally different workflow. It's also giving the students a sense of social presence and direct body interaction with the space. And social presence was really important for, what I wanted to achieve with them. Given the social isolation and challenges they were having. And then also the rapid prototyping aspect. It's much faster to iterate a design this way. So really in terms of like a design approach and creative approach, it's totally different. And we took the approach of designing from the future, which is, empathize with, a current issue that you are facing in the present. Imagine a future world where, you could overcome those issues and then, ideate and try it and directly create and paint those 3D world in VR and experiment with them. We try different painting and sculpting and animation tools directly in VR. We also use some, 2D kind of mood board, brainstorming, collection of reference images and all kind. But the key was really to prototype pretty fast and to import the world that they had painted or sculpted into a social VR app so that they could share it with the other students and we could visit each other's space and do the critiques directly in VR. And then, iterate and modify it and improve it. So that's kind of how we worked. And some of the tools that we used was Miro for brainstorming. Tilt Brush we tested different tools, but Tilt Brush was the ones that was the easiest and what the student really preferred to paint and sculpt in 3D directly. We still had to use Unity, a game engine, as a transform mechanism to put the world that they had created in Altspace VR. And Altspace VR was the social platform for multi-user and, social presence. So not all of the class was in, Altspace VR. Some of it was on Zoom, some of it was in VR directly, their own headsets that I shipped and sent them home. And then, in Altspace VR, we would meet once they had uploaded their world to be able to visit and interact and discuss. This is some of the, the early phase, some of the issues that they were facing, loneliness, playing games over time, liking having friends, not sleeping well, etc. But starting to ideate and see what kind of world they could build. And then those are some of the final virtual world that they built. So what I wanted to tell you is that what I asked them to envision was, imagine a world that would allow you to regenerate, to rebuild your energy, and to socialize with your friend. So it was not like a teaching place, but it's like what kind of space do you want to be in to meet with your friends? And it was really interesting that they all came up with like nature space, of course. So I'm just giving you a few examples, but Chelsea did this forest cafe hangout that was pretty cool. In the middle of the forest, you have this little cafe and you can meet your friend. And it's, all made with like wood elements. Very nice. And she was really proud of the forest that she created. It was really impressive. Then we had a Zen garden, which was on the top of a tall building in the city that John did. And it was a totally different feel. This was more like a night sky, a night, city. And he created some grass, some sand, and some bamboos and elements that you can walk around. And the neat stuff is that at some point, he had not set boundaries, so you could walk through the wall, the separation, and kind of be floating or actually fall through from the top of the building to the ground. So once he realized that, instead of like setting the boundaries to the wall, he realized, what would be really cool is to set the boundaries like, several feet beyond the wall. So you could still walk out, look down, like some people do with those glass bridges on the Grand Canyon. So you could still like not fall, look down and be safe. So, those are kind of the things that we would probably never have imagined if it was done differently. And then Dordy, she created like this fancy tree house with like 3 different floors where on each floor you could play games and hang out in the pool or, be with your friends. And And then this one was one of my favorite. This was a campground that Pranav did. And this was this camping trip that he was supposed to be taking with his friends that had been canceled. So he kind of created an ideal campground where he could hang out, with his dog and his friends. And there was this beautiful waterfall, and you could go swim in the river and camp, and have a picnic. So what I like is that those were done like very quickly with people who didn't know anything about 3D modeling. They were able to paint those worlds and use. There was also a library of other objects that people had created that they could reuse and import in there. So sharing was also an important part. But all in all, they what started as a very dark mood when they explored on the design board like how they felt during the pandemic, and when we ended, we basically like had a party inside of VR, and it was very joyful. So this is something that there was no study made of, and the sample was way too small with the number of students in my class. But I definitely saw like that they were enjoying meeting in VR much more than meeting on Zoom. So some of the, possibilities, it's more intuitive than traditional 3D modeling. They were able to create like this personal style and quickly iterate. It's not one of those dry 3D world that often you see when people make cubes and stuff like that. The design reviews and the sense of presence and spontaneity was really there. But at the same time, the VR creative tools, we tried a bunch, and some were working, some not so well, and oftentimes they are in beta, or, they are not fully commercial products, so it's a bit challenging to use. In terms of the future possibilities, definitely what has been emerging during the pandemic is that more and more there is this new job as a virtual world builder. There are companies hiring people to build those social VR world. And whether it's on Roblox, on, VR chat, or even, the more teaching oriented like Virbela, you have to build those worlds. And what I wanted to suggest is that a classroom doesn't have to look like a classroom. What my students wanted was like green space, not walls. So that was interesting. Teaching as a creative and exploratory process, because basically I was learning as much as they were learning as we were doing that, and kind of improvising and helping them along the way in this new kind of process. And then, of course, there are issues of accessibilities, ethics, and data privacy with the use of VR headsets, and all those apps, like, and especially the social apps. You have to be careful, like what is being recorded, what kind of accounts is required. Accessibility, not every student has a powerful enough, computer at home to be able to use that. So I had to find hoops through the system to allow some of them to come on campus when campus was closed, so they could access some of the computer lab, at least like 2 people maximum in the lab, so that they could still, use and those headsets and access have access to VR. And then, of course, getting some of those tools, and the pace and policies of academia is not always the same pace as the tech industry. So the tech industry is this constant moving target, and you are trying to get approval or, purchase something. But if it takes 5 months, it's already too late because the tools have changed, or, whatever. So it's a bit like really challenging. But what I wanted to say is this has really opened my eyes to the fact that VR is not just a new medium, but it also offers like new opportunities for embodied presence, which is really, important that we have to understand that, this is more than meeting on Zoom. Like we really have to create safe space for students and people to, if they are going to meet in VR. And I think also what I've been learning this past year is like, how do you teach more resilient skills? How do you teach more, open-minded and kindness and, communication when, like, basically digital health, when if you compare to what's happening on social media, it can become polarized so fast. So when we are going to bring that into VR as a social medium as well, plus our bodies and emotions, it can, become explosive if we don't start to think seriously about all the consequences and, how to develop future skills for students to be really change maker in this space and come from a place of safety and tolerance. I think it's very important to think of that as we do VR, because that's the next step, that's the next social media step. So I've put some links here about, there's a playlist of students giving the tour of the worlds that they have created on YouTube, and then some of the projects I've worked on. And if you want to hook up with me, I've put my LinkedIn link, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I think we already have a couple from Sting in the chat. One was some of the, I think this was towards the beginning of your presentation, some of the films that you created, were they mostly intended to be watched on a headset? How did the viewer experience those?
Yeah, they were intended to be watched on headset because they were full stereo, full 360 stereo. So it really gives you more of a sense of presence when you have the depth information. So yeah, they were meant to be experienced in headset, but at some point I think they were also put on, on the app on the website, and and at the time, there was cardboard, there were different type of like cheap headsets that could be used. Those days are gone a little bit, but in 2015-16, yeah, you could still have like the Samsung put in the Gear VR, and so those could be watched like more easily, yeah.
And then Sting also had another question. Do you consider that feeling the individual who was paralyzed, who the climbing film had a big impact for? Do you consider that the feeling the paralyzed person had to be about embodiment?
I'm not a medical doctor, but I think that, the brain being fully immersed in this environment um, is is kind of recreating the perception in the body of, what the environment is conveying. So it's kind of giving the illusion that, yeah, you are climbing with the climber, or and I've seen people when I was showing U-turn, because also in U-turn you have a first-person body. I've seen people talking back to the actors. I've seen people moving their arms, and stuff. So yeah, some people feel like fully embodied in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But embodiment has so many meanings, so many different meanings that, yeah.
If there are other questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask. Well, I have a question if no one else does. So we've seen with our students at the University of Rochester, and just like from my own personal experience, that these 3D tools often have a very steep learning curve. And so I'm wondering if you could, especially thinking about the students that you worked with, uh, coming into that class, had they had any prior experience with these tools? Was it completely new for them? How did you ask them to approach, like Unity has a very steep learning curve, for example. How did you approach that?
Yes, Unity has a very steep learning curve, but we were only using Unity for a specific task, which was to import the 3D tilt brush drawing into Unity, do some cleanup, and then use the importer to send it to Alspace VR. So for that, I created a very detailed, specific lessons, this step, this step, this step, this step. They didn't have to really know Unity
Okay.
fully, it was just an intermediate step to import, clean up. Like we had to add kind of a floor so that you wouldn't fall through the 3D world once it was in our space, like a collision surface. And that was about it. Maybe one, no, it was not even in this class. No, those students didn't really know Unity. And some of them, yes, maybe they had some 3D, they knew some 3D, but a lot of them were doing more like video and stuff like that before. So the tools in VR are much more intuitive because basically, like in Tilt Brush, you can paint a 3D shape, or we tried some other. Oh, my alarm is going off. Yeah, stop. Sorry, 45 minutes. Yeah, we tried some other tools where you could sculpt. Another one where you could animate directly, which was pretty fun, but a little bit more complicated because you still had to do like the keyframes and stuff. But it was really good because you could like grab the objects directly and move them and animate them, even the puppets. And we tried some stuff, so that was like much more intuitive, but you still had to like understand kind of the animation keyframe and framing. So yeah, in overall, I think like you could do that with teenagers. It's really pretty intuitive when you use those tools directly. Not the tools that are meant for like high-end design, for like people who are designing cars or airplanes or stuff like that. There are some very sophisticated 3D tools in VR that are like more complicated to learn, but the painting and sculpting tool, they are pretty obvious. Yeah. Basically we had like 2 lessons so they could start painting and using.
David has a question here. Did your students feel empowered by building their ideal worlds? Did they feel the exercise improved their imagination and gave them confidence to change the real world or afterward?
That questions of like, did they feel empowered to change the real world? I didn't ask them. Like I said, I didn't make a scientific study, but they definitely felt empowered to design their own world. Yeah. It was not a group project. Each person was doing their own personal stuff and sharing it with other people and inviting others. What we did is that we had a base space, which was basically my space, where we created portals and they could teleport to each other's. And so that's how we did like the guided visits and stuff. And they really loved this feature of being able to, invite each other and teleport. Yes, because originally some of what they had designed on paper or the reference image that they had collected were like pretty basic or first step. But once they did their first prototype in VR and they started to have feedback and to be there in person, they went like, oh no, I can do much more. So there was really a dramatic change between like the first prototype and the last one that they did. And yeah, they were proud. They were proud of the world that they created. Definitely, they were really proud. Now, on the long term, the impact on like going out and changing the world, I think you need to teach them way more skills in order to become change maker and to feel empowered. Yeah, there are like a lot of other skills that needs to happen.
Laura also had a question. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Hi, Nathalie. I work at the Career Center on campus here, so I'm always interested in the connection of these technologies and this art to jobs. And you mentioned that the job of virtual world builder is a thing. So of course I went on Indeed.com and I typed in virtual world builder and not a lot came up. So I'm wondering, like, what exactly are people looking for when they're looking for this job? What are they called? Like VR developer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, usually it's called virtual world, but they are probably looking for people who can do like 3D modeling. Yeah, because basically it's like painting and sculpting is fine for prototyping, but the final version you probably want something that is a little bit more classic or modeled and optimized. So yeah, it's I can check it out, but it's definitely social VR or virtual world modeler. But yeah, still modeler would be the technical description of the job. Yeah. But
Great.
yeah, it's happening all over the place. And oftentimes, the jobs might not be posted in regular job boards because it's the people who are inside the social VR apps that are finding, other people to kind of build for them. If they cannot do it themselves, then they are asking other people to do it for them. It's also part of, there is a lot of like live performance events happening, and they also need to build those venues and world festivals, film festival conferences. They have been doing it a lot. They build their own venue, and Sundance has done it, Venice, the Venice Film Festival has done it. They customize the worlds totally, and some universities have built their own, campuses as well, virtual campuses. So yeah.
That sounds like a cool job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, I might ask just one more. Oh wait, Roberta, looks like maybe.
Can you hear me? My video may not be working though. Hi, thank you very much. This was a wonderful session to participate in. I was wondering, I probably should turn the video off. I was just wondering, the accessibility of these tools for those that are not going into this as a profession. Are there any recommendations you might have for some freely available entry point tools and resources? What are some of the ones that you gravitate towards?
Yeah, so all of those tools that I've mentioned are free already. Miro, for brainstorming, is free and is a wonderful tool. You can brainstorm online together. Tilbrush was a tool that Google had bought and was supporting, but they stopped supporting it 6 months like right after I finished this class. However, Tilbrush, you can still buy it. I think it's like $20. But what the original owner and developer of Tilbrush convinced Google to do is to release it as an open source software. So now the community was so crushed that Tilbrush was stopped by Google, which they do with a lot of products. They do them for 3 years and then, it's not like whatever. They don't continue. So there is now an open brush community of developers who, and it's free. It's open source software. So you can use open brush. And there is also, so it has forked. There is also another version which is called multi-brush, where you can actually have multiple people painting together. So you don't even need the step that I was doing, which is to import in Unity and then import in Altspace VR. You can, have multiple people painting together inside of multi-brush. But Altspace VR is still there. All those other social apps, usually they allow you to import packages. And they are free, and Unity is free. So most of those tools are free. Yeah.
Great,
I
thank
think
you.
there is a simple one, which is more for sketching, interactive content in VR, which is called Shape VR. That also came out a few months ago, and it's great to build rapid prototypes. So yeah, most of those tools, and sometimes if they were not free, I would just contact the company and ask them for like a free trial for 6 months from the university, and they were often very willing to. So
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I think we've only got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. But thank you so much, Nathalie, for joining us. We are very grateful to learn more about your work, and thank you everyone who also attended. If you would like to continue following Nathalie's work, please visit her LinkedIn. We put that in the chat. And then I also encourage you to check out the rest of the Voices of XR speaker series. We have a really exciting lineup this semester. Our next event will be on Friday, March 18th with Kavya Perlman. She is the founder and CEO of the XR Safety Initiative, and she's going to be talking about data privacy and safety issues for XR. It's really important. So I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. And then thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.